No one knows how many allegations of child abuse are investigated in the UK each year. The only police force to keep a database of all abuse allegations is West Yorkshire. Last year, they and social services investigated 4,000. Most are against family members or trusted friends like Tarina's former babysitter.
Basically, he tortured my eldest daughter. And I mean, he'd tied her up, and he'd gagged her, and he'd hit her, and he'd shoved a knitting needle up her, he'd put badges up her bottom. I mean, there was an awful lot he'd done, and he'd threatened her, and he'd terrified her. The younger one of my two girls, although he did a lot of the same things, when he tied her up, he never tied her tight. She could always get free at any time. And when he gagged her, she could always just pull it off. But with my eldest daughter, she was literally bound hand and foot and couldn't move.
When the Orkney children were returned to their families, another abuse investigation had ended in controversy. In October, a new Children's Act comes into force. It aims to improve investigations. There are many taboos in reporting abuse. You never see the faces of the families or children involved, even when allegations have been disproved. In theory, the taboos are meant to protect children. In practice, one wonders.
We must not take children away from their homes in circumstances like we've seen in Orkneys and Rochdale. I've had children taken away into care from their home. They remember that vividly and the impact on them and what happened to them in the next few hours, but they often don't remember other significant events in their lives. So we've got to learn from that.
The way in which the media reacts does make it very difficult for people in the field to exercise a balanced judgment. You can be sure that on the very day that the media were disclaiming the work of social workers who'd been involved in Orkney, that up and down the country there were other children who were dying as a result of abuse, where perhaps with the value of hindsight, social workers would be feeling that maybe they should have intervened.
There have been many tragedies, like the deaths of Maria Colwell and Kimberly Carlisle, where it's been hard to understand why social workers took no action. There also continue to be other, less tragic and less well-publicised cases where the behaviour of social services is baffling. For the last 3 years, the neighbours here have been trying to get social workers to take action on behalf of the children next door.
My children's bedroom, it meets onto the children's bedroom, and they were being kept awake at night, sometimes for several hours, with this screaming, which, sometimes went on till, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
The Reeds visited the house with Mrs. Owen, who was no longer living there. She had left in 1988 with her eldest daughter, Louise. The 2 youngest daughters continued living there.
As I advanced up to the staircase, I noticed a lock on the children's door. I opened the children's door and there's feces up the window, the walls. It was stinking of urine. It was in a terrible state. And as I went around the rooms, there's Calpol bottles everywhere, empty ones. In the kitchen, you couldn't get in the kitchen for debris. It was disgusting.
A little while after, I went down the garden and I heard them screaming in the bedroom, and I looked up and Natasha had got her pot and had got her hands in it, and she got doing this up and down the window with it, and then she started to throw it up the window like this. So that explained why the bedroom was in such a filthy state. Nobody would take any notice of what was going on in that house. And the screaming was so loud, and it started at 11:15 one night and it carried on till 1:45. And both girls were at it. And I put a microphone up the wall, and I thought, I am determined that people will know that I am not telling a pack of lies, particularly the social services.
The amount of time that I've spent sort of writing letters and that we've spent going to police stations, I mean, I've been to the police and contacted them about 6 times.
Going to the police is not easy for any child, but eventually Louise went to make a statement. She described conditions in the house to officers and social workers.
Did you think they believed you?
No.
Why did you think they didn't believe you?
Because of their faces.
Why had you wanted to go in there and say what had happened?
Because I wanted to help my sisters.
Because you're frightened for your sisters?
Yeah.
And what did you feel like when you thought they didn't believe you?
Well, I felt a bit guilty in that.
You
I thought that they was going to help me, and I felt a bit sad as well.
because they didn't help you?
And sisters.
We feel that both she and the children have been very much let down by social services and the police and everybody.
And Mum asked Moira to speak to her, quite anxious, getting feedback from school that Meg's sort of masturbating in the class constantly.
The family is sacred. Social workers often worry about intruding or putting pressure on inadequate families. The risks they have to balance are complex and can change quickly. A new boyfriend with a history of violence may turn a mother who can just about cope into a nervous wreck who'll batter her child. Yet about 30% of social workers have no formal qualifications. The others only get a very general training and none in interviewing children. After 2 years' study, they're supposed to be experts on children, on old people, on the disabled, and on the mentally ill. Unlike doctors, nurses, and most other professions, social workers have no body which gives them a license to practice and can strike them off if they misbehave. It leaves them uncertain of their status and uncertain of their role.
Open up. Try opening it up.
I think that the government needs actually to give social workers some clear direction. They need to actually tell us what is expected of us, because I, for one, don't know anymore.
In a number of cases, either social workers and police officers get rather confused and are not sure what is in the interests of the child.
I feel sure that there is a confusion, and I think that social workers have a number of roles that they have to undertake in child protection work. They're expected to be therapists, investigators, report writers, evidence gatherers. They have to have a knowledge of the legal system that I would have said perhaps only a relatively short time ago, perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, would have been greater than most solicitors. Perhaps one of the difficulties is what exactly do we want our social workers to do?
After Cleveland, many local child protection committees were set up. Social workers were told to work with teachers, police, health visitors and doctors. But different professions have different ideas of what protecting a child means. Traditionally, social workers don't like being judgmental. They're there to help, not tell people how to run their lives. Research doesn't offer simple answers. It shows that abused children are damaged if they stay in the family and damaged if they're taken away. Many experts also believe that removing children to put them in residential care can expose them to more abuse. In the confusion, the police often seem the clearest.
Has he ever done anything to you that you don't like?
I don't like touching me.
Where does he touch you?
Where?
What do you call it? Fanny. These are hard questions to answer, aren't they? Because I know how it must feel, but you know when I said I was a police lady? Well, if somebody's doing something to a child and the child doesn't like it, it's my job to make that person stop doing it.
If a child's been hung out of a second floor bedroom window by their feet for periods of up to about 10 minutes until they accede to the sexual demands of their father, or locked in a black screw-top dustbin for periods of up to an hour until they accede to the sexual demands of the next-door neighbour. If that's tea and sympathy, I'll have a long discussion with anybody and argue it through. That's a crime, and that requires police intervention. It is not a social complaint. It requires criminal action by the courts.
6 years old. Right.
For most police forces, to protect the child is to catch the villain.
Not yet. Who's the allegation against? And his name?
West Yorkshire Police have invested heavily in child abuse work after a local director of social services was jailed for abusing children. Jackie Starkey and Dave Wilkinson are part of a specialist domestic violence and child abuse team. The allegation is all too familiar. A 6-year-old has told teachers her grandfather abused her. A neighbour volunteered information.
Maybe little girls, he entices them in with ice creams and cakes. He knows he's working somewhere, but we don't really know where. And we've got the details of his car, and the man will ring us if he comes home. He says he's usually home by about 6:30 in the evening.
The detectives have one aim, to find the man and question him.
Various people chasing him for various things, including us now.
It's recognised that the different constituent agencies of area child protection committees are working to a different set of priorities even though they're working on the same task, which is protecting children. They may actually view how to protect children in quite fundamentally different ways.
What the police usually want to achieve is evidence of an offence having been taken place. So they want to get the child, to get the evidence from the child. We have to balance that need against the need to protect the child from further injury.
Social workers have genuinely been the people responsible for investigating and protecting children. And then all of a sudden, the police have actually taken a very high profile. And I think workers welcome that, and social workers welcome the introduction of specialist police teams. I think, though, if you look at the prosecution and conviction levels in relation to the number of child protection referrals, they're very small. So there's a question about why do the police have to be so involved if at the end of the day the criminal process is only a small proportion of the total number of cases.
In the afternoon, the detectives went back. They don't have to deal with ordinary crime. Social workers in the same area teams have to handle any problem that crops up. This time, the man they were looking for was in, and they went to question him. 15 minutes later, he'd been arrested.
This man's been arrested on suspicion of indecent assault on a 6-year-old girl.
How tall are you?
5 9 3/4 now.
Stand up straight. No, you're about 6'1".
I'm not.
Well, send me back to that measure over there.
5 9 3/4 now.
6'1". 6'1". Again.
Grown.
Do you wish to speak?
The West Yorkshire database shows how vulnerable really young children are. 34% of investigations concern children under 6. 3- and 4-year-olds appear to be the most at risk. 16% of allegations involve them. Young children find it hardest to speak and to give evidence. In the car, the police learnt that the man's family had forced him to move out of the house. They suspected what he might have been doing and tried to deal with it themselves. Now the family doesn't want the police or social services involved. Yet the police want a confession, as a 6-year-old child won't perform well in court.
There is absolutely nothing more cool, calculating than a child abuser. The fact that seduction is part of the process doesn't mean to say that the seduction isn't carefully planned, processed and effected.
He said to her, if you don't let me do it to you, I should do it to the baby. Now, my baby was 18 months old at the time, another little girl. And if you don't let me do it to you, I should do it to her. And she let it carry on to protect the baby. And he'd taken every single ability for her to tell anybody, because he said if she told me, I'd be cross, I'd say she was dirty and disgusting, I'd send her away, she'd never see me again. If she told her dad would be so cross he'd hit him and he'd go to prison. And if she told anybody else, they'd say her daddy had done it, and her daddy would go to prison for the rest of his life.
Many official reports have offered solutions.
One of the key messages out of the Butler Slosh inquiry at Cleveland, for me, the key message, was that all professionals involved in child abuse work must learn to listen to children effectively. Not just hear what they're saying, but listen to what's behind the words and the gestures and the body movements. And that's not something that just one picks up instinctively. and social workers and police and paediatricians even really need proper training.
Ironically, in West Yorkshire, it's the police who have the resources to train their staff to interview children. All the detectives who joined the child abuse unit spend 3 weeks learning how to question children. This exercise is about events that took place in a school the day before.
Yeah, with a lady. Yeah? And he came to the classroom. He dropped out his suitcase and all stuff came out.
Did he?
Tell us some more then about him.
He was coming to do radiator, but it wasn't our class he was meant to go to.
Mm-hmm.
What about the lady? What about, you know, the lady that was with him?
Yeah.
Can you remember what she looked like at all?
No.
Nothing about her at all. It doesn't matter if you can't. No?
Very few people can actually talk to children properly, and even fewer of those can actually talk to children, interview them evidentially, and elicit good quality information from them.
Well, one, it's important to not start, I think, from the premise that the child is going to tell you that they've been sexually abused. The purposes of interviews, and I think I'd use the word assessment interview as opposed to disclosure, is that you have a child that is presenting with concerns, and that the focus of the interview is to find out what is causing the level of anxiety or emotional disturbance within that child.
In Haringey, Cathy Doran has got the local police to agree that it may not always help the child to press a criminal investigation. There are other priorities, but in most places it's different. Children are questioned by police and social workers as equal partners, but equal partners with different agendas. The social workers want insight, while the police want evidence.
It's really, for one, getting the child to trust you, to be able to talk to you. That all of a sudden they're brought into a strange police station environment. There's a person sitting there that they don't know, they've never seen before, asking them questions. And you've got to make that child trust you, that you're going to help them and that they're not doing something wrong by telling you what's happened. Because a lot of children are told that if they do tell somebody what's happened to them, either they'll get into trouble or they've done wrong. And you've got to get rid of that fear from them.
Unlike physical abuse, sexual abuse usually leaves no obvious injuries. The investigators are after secrets. The disclosure room in Eccles Hill looks like a playroom. In this case, a 9-year-old boy was the victim, but it was only discovered when he abused his foster parent's daughter, who was 3 years old.
I see. What do you normally use your private for? What's it there for? Is it to do a wee? Is that what you do a wee? Okay. And so you put that in Chantal's mouth, did you? Now, why did you do that?
Because my dad did it to me.
Your dad used to do it to you, did he? What? He would put his private in your mouth or ask you to do it?
He did it to me.
So he'd put his private in your mouth?
Some of these kids are just absolutely bursting to tell you what's happened. That's not the problem. The problem is making sure that we do it the correct way.
And what are the pitfalls that you have to watch out for?
Leading questions, basically. That is important. And you have to be very mindful of that.
We're very aware that it will obviously be distressing, but I think for a lot of children, depending on the age, look on it as quite an adventure. They're at a police station and it can be quite an adventurous thing for them if it's made out like that. We try not to make them feel under stress about what we're talking to them about. You try and make a game of it and make it fun for them, which, strange enough, it can be done.
When a 4-year-old girl was brought in, the problems became clear. The social worker stayed outside the disclosure room as he wasn't trained. With young children, it can sometimes be very hard to get answers without pressure and prompting.
How old did you say you were? 3? You're a big lump for 3. Goodness me. Tell you what, this little white secret you've got with Uncle Sam, I'm sure you can tell us, can't you? And show us what a really big girl you are. And I bet you nothing will happen if you tell us what this white secret is. And I promise. Go on.
I think it is a move forward and a positive move forward that we're working together, but I think there are a lot of tensions. Unless they're out in the open and worked through and recognised, then I don't think it's in the interests of children and families, because they get caught in the middle of those unspoken tensions.
As the emotional temperature rises, it's easy to see how policemen and social workers could become convinced that a child is under stress, not because of the situation they're in, but because they have so much to hide.
Why did Uncle Sam tell you it was a secret? Danielle?
What?
You getting tired now? Hiya. Well, I tell you what, Danielle, sit up a minute.
Don't be cross with you, Dad.
If you're tired and you want to go home, hey, and you want Grandma, all right, all you need to do is tell us your little secret, and then we'll go get Grandma, and you can go home. And that'll be okay, won't it? And nobody's going to be cross with you if you think this secret might be naughty, because it isn't.
It's mine.
It's yours, is it? Can you not tell us this secret then? Hey? And then we go get Grandma?
Auntie Sally.
And Auntie Sally? Would you like that? Would you like to go get Grandma and Auntie Sally? Yeah? And go back home? Would you like that?
There'll be questions that have to be asked that are really going to put a little bit of pressure on the kids, in some case a lot of pressure on the kids. For a child to say, for example, that it's been my daddy that's been doing this, or my granddad that's been doing this, or whatever, is a very, very difficult decision to make.
Despite all the publicity, only a minority of allegations concern sexual abuse. In West Yorkshire in 1990, 28% of allegations investigated were of sexual abuse, 22% were of physical violence, 33% were because of general concern. Whatever the problem, the present methods don't make it easy for children.
The questions they were asking her were a little brusque to be. It was terrible. They seemed to ask her some questions which she couldn't possibly answer. They went over things about her sister. Virtually, I felt that there's browbeating the girl.
Louise, do you remember going to the police?
Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, it's a bit nerve-wracking.
And did you mind the questions they asked you?
Well, I didn't really know any different. I thought they was meant to ask questions.
Oh. Were you embarrassed by them?
Yeah.
Were they hard to answer because you were embarrassed by them?
Some of them were.
You feel comfortable?
I felt comfortable-ish.
Comfortable-ish?
Yeah.
Does that mean there were things that bothered you about it?
Yeah.
What kind of things?
Well, it's hard to say.
Was it because the things they were asking you to talk about were very painful?
Some things.
I've made a lot of decisions about a lot of children, and I know that I've returned some children to their homes too quickly, and I know they've been abused again. I also know that I've taken into care children where the damage that has occurred to them because they've been in care has been greater than the damage that was done to them by abuse in their own homes. Oh, I've made mistakes, and social services departments make mistakes. But, you know, we're in a business in which decisions are decisions of judgment. They're not decisions that can be fed into a computer and the right answer come out.
It's not unusual for families to make a choice. If you can imagine the situation where, in particular, if the abuser is still in the household, you're then, in effect, asking the woman to choose between believing the children and believing the man, who quite often, in fact invariably, is saying that this is not true. And therefore they have to choose. And quite often they do actually choose to believe the man rather than the child.
And does that shock you when that happens?
It doesn't shock me because I've seen it happen many times before.
The man Jackie Starkey arrested didn't make a confession, so the police need more evidence.
I'm wanting an authority to search a man's flat, please, sir. He was arrested earlier on today on suspicion of indecent assault on a young girl. He's been interviewed, but we'd like to go and search his flat. Obviously, pornographic films, magazines, anything that could assist with the inquiry.
Fine. And what are we searching it under?
Section 18.
Section 18 of the Police Act?
Yes.
Very well. I'll grab
Jackie,
that.
what kind of things are you looking for in cases like these?
Usually pornographic material, videos, magazines, anything that could either implicate him in child porn, anything explicit that you can't buy over the shelf, like Mayfair. Your usual magazines, we don't mind, or we don't sort of bat an eyelid, but you can tend to get the hardcore magazines that come from abroad, anything with children on it.
The police found no such material, and later this particular man was released without charge.
Abusers these days are fully aware of DNA profiling. Abusers know full well that they can be identified by semen. They know full well that there's a stronger chance of being convicted with corroborative evidence, such as forensic evidence or photographic evidence. So we're finding now that the culmination of an abuser's sexual activity, in many cases, is not penetration to the child per anus or per vagina. It is actual oral sex. And it's damn difficult to actually get forensic evidence from a child. Up to about 5 hours, I think, semen lasts for identification purposes in the mouth.
Dealing with such allegations isn't easy. The West Yorkshire Police do not allow anyone to do child abuse investigations for more than 3 years. Any officer can ask for confidential help from a local psychologist. Social workers don't get this help, yet they are as likely as the police to be distressed by the confusion and cruelty they uncover.
I think it would help if social workers were given the option at times to say, no, this work is too difficult for me. I can't face up to this. Because child abuse work does raise anxieties in yourself. It does make you have to face up to your feelings, your own feelings about, in some cases, I have to say, abuse that the social workers themselves have experienced and have never worked through.
The spoken and unspoken anxieties of social workers may affect how they follow up cases, but the easiest thing to do is to blame everything on the lack of resources. In some London boroughs, 1/3 of children on the at-risk register have no social worker allocated to them.
It may be that a high level of unallocated cases indicates very good frontline workers recognizing and spotting and correctly referring these cases up for further investigation to a beleaguered social services department who've got staff shortages, not sufficient numbers of people trained to do the investigations, dealing with this growing sort of number of please will you follow up and see whether something more sinister is going on in this particular child's case. And in the absence of being able to assess and sift through which cases need further work, it does mean that there will be situations that are indeed worrying and have been correctly identified by primary workers at an early stage, which are being left to become more and more sinister and to actually grow into bigger and bigger problems.
One way to avoid these problems, but an expensive one, is to observe families over time, as at Rye Hill in Newcastle.
I don't know how social services departments could cope without a Rye Hill type centre. When some alleged abuse or actual proven abuse takes place, people can act too quickly. When sometimes you need to sit back and start thinking it out and talking to people and balancing the judgment against new evidence as it emerges. After all, an interview with a social worker or policeman about allegations of child abuse must be a hair-raising thing for the parents. And I think you often fail to get the real truth. The real truth either whether it's worse or better than you expect.
Rye Hill runs a day centre for vulnerable children. Families can also come to live for up to 12 months in one of its 7 flats. For many, it's their last hope of keeping a child. Rye Hill has taken families where children have been murdered.
The majority of the families that come here, if we weren't here, it would mean that their chances are they wouldn't be having their children at all. And this is their only opportunity they have to show that they can learn to care for their children in a safe and acceptable way.
The families live under constant supervision. Staff model what they call good enough parenting. What do you think you're learning here?
To cope better with them. I couldn't cope with 2 kids on my own.
And do you resent the fact that you're in a place like this, or are you glad?
I'm glad.
Yeah. What do you think would have happened if you hadn't come here?
I probably wouldn't have got the kids back.
What was it like being watched while you're doing these things?
Horrible. It didn't seem like they were my kids.
Whose kids did they seem to
Didn't
be?
think they were theirs. Because every time I seemed to do something, they were always there.
Parents are given at least 15 objectives, and every 2 weeks there's a formal feedback meeting. Sue has 2 children and a history of problems.
But sometimes I get them up, like, if Josh has woke up, or I've woke up like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, or even earlier, I've got him out of bed, and even when he's been asleep, I've said, you know, go to the toilet sort of thing. On some occasions I've either forgot and he hasn't wet the bed, or on some occasions I forgot and he has wet the bed, or he gets up himself. So it's not too bad. He hasn't wet the bed for a while.
You're not cross with them, or
oh no,
you just get him up and change the bed and put him back into.
If I didn't know why he was doing it, then I don't suppose I'd be cross, but I would be. I can't explain. I wouldn't be too pleased.
What sort of situations do you ask for staff help?
Well, there was one time when Louise had seen him, you know, and I was like pulling his arm really hard and that, which I really regret, but you know, it was just to save him, because if he'd slipped, he would have whacked his head on the side of the bath. And then I thought, well, you know, I couldn't really cope with him, because, you know, I didn't know what to do. I thought, well, you know, should I ask for help, or should I just get on with it myself? And I knew that I couldn't.
Are you feeling better about asking for help, Susan?
Yeah, because I know that it's not like a bad thing. I know that at the end of the day, it's a good thing, and that, you know, by me asking for help, it's going to come out good, instead of just like me getting on with it, and because she's not going to know whether I can cope with the kids or not, because I've not asked for help, you know. But I know that if I ask for help, then you'll know, and it's a good thing.
Every day at 5 o'clock, the staff report on how each family has coped that day.
I don't know what it must be like to be in here and have people watching and commenting on the things that I do, with a possible view to the children being taken away. So it must be very hard and stressful for the parents, and you can understand it, why at times they do get angry and abusive towards you.
When I've intervened in things that I've been told it's none of my business, and when I've tried to say, well, you know, it is my business because I'm assessing you here, I've been told in no uncertain terms to get out and go away, and I've been physically pushed. I mean, there's not been any blunt instruments or anything used, but yes, I have felt personally threatened.
Number 3, Susan will demonstrate she can protect her children from dangerous or potentially dangerous situations.
Really be careful, Susan, because it only takes once.
When he cut his finger on the razor blade, even though it was just like a little cut, you know, I knew that he could, like I said, he could have had it in his mouth and that would have been the end of his tongue. You know, it could have been pretty, bad.
These were both quite serious things to leave lying around, the razor blade and the tablets, but you've learned from that and make sure you don't do it again.
Susan will demonstrate she can deal with her feelings appropriately without it affecting the care of the children.
How do you feel that's gone over that fortnight?
Okay, apart from like those few days, which, like you said, that you know, which various people have said, when you feel upset and annoyed and down, even though you don't shout and scream at the kids inside will feel that, have I done something wrong, you know?
I think the important thing you said for me was that the children might think it's their fault. I don't think you used that word, but that's what you were saying, that the children might think it's their fault, and that's the bit that's important, isn't it? And you've recognised that.
If I just go out every night and get drunk and come back not look after the kids, then, you know, I'll not be surprised if they say, right, you know, you can't have your kids back. But the way I'm going now, hopefully at the end of the day, at the end of the assessment, they'll say, yeah, she's been great with the kids. She's, everything that was there before is now gone, hopefully, and yeah, you can go home with the kids.
I'm prepared to take risks in situations where families recognise their problems and they're owning their problems. They're not blaming someone else that it was someone else's fault. They're actually owning it as theirs, and that they're showing real commitment to making changes so that the children have a better future.
You can see
Chris and her husband still visit Rye Hill, though they no longer live there. Chris had all her previous children removed, but after 19 months in Rye Hill, she and her husband have been allowed to keep their new child.
He needs help with others.
Right, Adrian? The day when I had my case conference, I was a bit frightened to go into the case conference room. And the staff had to force me in there because I wasn't going to go in there.
And what were you frightened of?
I was frightened I was going to say, we're taking the pen off you. And I was just shaking. But when they said that they're giving us a good chance with the pen, and up to now it's gone fine.
And do you think what do you think would have happened if there hadn't been a place like Rye Hill?
They would have took the pen off us.
Some biscuits. Biscuits.
In Edinburgh, the Nidri Family Centre has aims similar to Rye Hill, but it's more informal. Samantha is Kim's third daughter. Her first was adopted, her second lives with her mother. Samantha spent 14 months in foster care. Nidri has been assessing Kim while she lives there. It's teaching her to be a better parent. But what is distinctive about Nidri is that families in crisis can check in, rather like at a hotel, for 72 hours of emergency help. The children aren't taken into care. Sharon chose to come when she felt she couldn't cope with her two children.
That one's broken, so
And I went to the doctors, and the doctors had phoned up here, and I came down here to speak to Jeff. And I stayed for a few nights just to get some help with Gary, because he was up like every 2 hours, night and day for feeds. And I felt like I was just losing the head with them all the time for like next to no reason. I was like shouting at them and smacking the older one for like no reason at all. It was just getting too hard for me to cope with them. And especially like if Christopher was up, because he's a bit hyperactive with the medicine he's on. And like if he was up running about playing and you're up feeding Gary and really tired, and it's worse if you didn't feel well. Because all you want to do is sleep anyway, but it's terrible. I mean, it's made a big difference to me coming here. Because when I've come here, I usually just come in crisis and sit and cry.
So have you cried in this room?
Probably 100 times. I think I've cried in every room in this building. And I don't know, it's just... I think it's because they didn't push you to talk. I think they just let you crying in, like, say to you, "Look, what's happened?" And they just give you the time to talk when you're ready to talk.
For all its good work, Nidri was threatened with closure recently, and the pressure on social services is so great that it's sometimes in danger of being turned into a children's home.
Just at this moment in time, all our foster homes, all our available foster homes are being used. And there have been occasions over the past week or two when we've had to make special arrangements to care for young children.
While we were filming, Nidri had to take a 6-year-old foster parents couldn't cope with and a 10-year-old whose stepfather couldn't have him for a while. All of it took time and resources away from teaching families how to cope. Yet that's crucial work, especially because no one is sure that the kind of techniques Rahil and Nidri use can work with sexual abuse as well as physical abuse. Few local authorities can offer children specialised help.
My elder daughter's very, very insecure. She's got no confidence. She's got no confidence whatsoever anymore. We have to be very careful. She gets very depressed, which, I mean, she's 9 now. But, I mean, when she was 8, she tried to commit suicide. Now, that was hard to take at 8 years old, trying to hang herself. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly what it meant. My social worker tried to palm me off and say, no, she doesn't understand death and how final death is. But I know my daughter, and I guarantee you she knew what she was doing because she felt she'd upset me enough, her daddy enough, and she just felt she wasn't worth anything. And she still feels a lot like that now.
This scheme in Bradford helps children prepare for going to court.
Truth. Do you know what truth means?
Truth is something that happened in real life.
Right, thank you. Some other people are going to ask you questions now.
Is your name Thomas?
Only 13% of investigations end in a court case, yet the prospect dominates all abuse work. Court is always an ordeal, and children face tough cross-examination.
Can you tell us now what happened?
Martin hit Robert first.
Now, come on now, Thomas. It was 2 weeks ago now. That's a long time. And how sure can you be that you remember exactly what happened?
Because it was a badding.
Here, children are not allowed to go through their real stories. That would be rehearsing the evidence. Defence lawyers now argue that if children get counselling, it allows them to rehearse. So increasingly, the defence demands case notes and tapes of any therapy children get.
They've entered into a therapeutic contract where they believe they have a safe space to talk about their feelings and their emotions. And suddenly they hear, maybe 2 days before they're due to give evidence, that all the confidential material that they've shared with their therapist is going to actually be seen by the people and maybe the suspect and the abuser in some cases. And so the issue is there's nowhere safe for these children to talk.
I think one of the consequences of focusing all of your resources and training exclusively on the investigative procedure without spending an equal amount of time and resources at post-protection work means that your investigative teams over time become more and more demoralized and depressed because they have to be asking themselves, what's the point of investigating and discovering this abuse when there's no follow-on treatment and help for the families in which we identify as having a child who's been sexually abused, so that the workers are becoming ineffective.
Have you spoken to Kim about the abuse that happened before you went into prison?
No. And even if the abuser is sent to prison, is that a success? Steve has just come out of jail after serving 7 weeks. He was found guilty of indecency against Caroline's 2 children. Caroline is pregnant by him and wants him back. Ealing Social Services can't stop him going back to live at her house with her and the children he abused.
I think it's important for Kim, for any kid who's been abused, that they're allowed to make the boundaries around a relationship and they're allowed to decide.
The guidelines are.
Yeah. When I've been talking to Steve on an individual basis, he has been very keen to pass on to me that he felt that he abused the kids because he was feeling resentful and powerless and out of control, and that they were laughing and mocking at him. My concern was that the kind of things that he raises with me suggest that none of those things that he saw as precipitating factors had actually changed in any way. And that if they're still around, then I would think that potentially the kids are still at risk.
We'd be up early, the kids are up late at night, we'd be arguing about getting the kids up, and they'd be up to sort of
We lost a
11,
lot of
12,
jobs.
and I'd lost about so many jobs over it, and I've kept thinking I'm going to end up with nothing.
So we're actually in a position where it's not so much of a problem because you're not in the house?
Oh, no. What do you mean?
If you were in the house, it would feel like more of a problem for you.
Yeah.
I think you've got to be careful that you're not almost defending the abuse of the girls.
Oh, no.
You're both agreeing that there are other things wrong, and I can see that.
Yeah.
But that in no way defends
Oh, no, I'm not covering up
behaviour
for
that was
myself,
illegal.
no.
I would feel more confident if we had more strength behind us, but that would actually mean taking legal steps. And at the moment, the family are quite happy to work with us on a voluntary basis.
But you've actually no means of monitoring or making sure they're not telling you a pack of lies, have you?
We only have their say-so and the individual work that's being done with Kim, with Norma. Our means of knowing whether they're sticking to the rules that we've set is what the family themselves are telling us.
Steve is now probably going back to live at Caroline's with the children he abused.
I would like to see more effective use made of the fact of taking the alleged abuser out of that home and not taking the child out of the home. Now, I know that was one of the recommendations that was made in Cleveland, but we're still not seeing enough cases where the abuser or the alleged abuser is encouraged to leave the house.
Taking children away may protect them, but it also punishes them. They lose their home. They may well find themselves exposed to more abuse in residential care. Is being the victim of incest worse than being the victim of pin-down? Everybody constantly complains of lack of resources, but there's also a lack of coordination between different agencies. In Edinburgh, Kim has proved to the social workers at Niddry that she can look after her child, only to find that the housing department is about to make them both homeless.
Homeless accommodation, it'll actually up her points and make it more likely that she gets a house sooner. So there's an incentive for her to become homeless in that sense.
The problem is there are £500 worth of rent arrears, and the housing department are taking it to the housing committee to see if they can either waive those arrears or decide to give her a house. You know, if she can show that she's wanted to pay these off and demonstrate that by paying that on a regular basis. So it's got to go to committee before Kim's allocated a house. And in the meantime, she has to go into homeless accommodation.
The new Children's Act will do nothing to resolve such paradoxes. It does make it harder to take children into care, but it's worrying that many of the social workers who will have to operate it feel that they are themselves victims of the media and of a public that wants children to be protected without hurting parents.
There were angry words directed at Social Services Director Paul Lee and his staff.
The children were frightened when they were taken. If you are a little bit frightened, madam, it won't nearly be enough.
I've worked in social work for many years, and I think social workers find it extremely painful, one, to recognise that a child is being abused and are aware that the care system does not offer, wonderful alternatives to children, and that actually taking a child away from their parents is a very, very difficult, painful process for all parties concerned. But I think social workers feel in a bit of a can't-win situation at the moment. If they don't do it and something happens, they get berated. If they do it and there's question marks about why they did it, then they get berated. So I think they're really in a very difficult and a catch-22 position at the moment.
Whether you like it or not, the first line of defence to protect children from abuse that society has are its social workers. And in the end, society has to take a view as to whether undermining the confidence of that line of defence in the way as has happened is in the best interest of children or in the best interest of society itself.
It's hard, if you feel insecure, to be self-critical. Very few social workers are willing to admit publicly they made mistakes and through that caused children and families to suffer. One exception is Brian Roycroft.
We have to make decisions on the evidence available to us based on our experience. And the mistakes I live with and feel very sad about. I'm very distressed about some of them, but one learns from them and hopes that the next time you're faced with the same situation, you've got that added bit of experience to make a better judgment.
What makes learning from experience so hard is that abuse conjures up horrific images and strong taboos. Fantasies take hold all too easily. Social workers seem to be particularly prone to two kinds. One is that they are heroes who must save children, so act now, think later. The other is that the family is the best thing children have, so don't interfere. Without a solid professional training, it's not surprising social workers can find it hard to keep an open mind about complex evidence, and are sometimes vulnerable to such fantasies without even realizing it.
You cannot do this type of work on the cheap. Many people who I talk to in various parts of the country are complaining the fact that they're not getting any support or training. And you cannot expect a cordon bleu result if you're going to get kind of SIDS Cafe training.